Welcome to Playthink, conversations about games, interactivity, art, and culture. This podcast is recorded live at the USC Game Innovation Lab, which is part of the USC Games program at the University of Southern California. For more information, follow us on Twitter at USC Game Lab or visit our website at gameinnovationlab.com/playthink.
All right. Thanks, Lauren and Monica, for coming to Playthink. I'm Jane Pinckard. I'm Associate Professor of the Practice of Cinematic Arts here in the Interactive Media and Games Division. And I want to briefly introduce our guests. Lauren Ludwig and Monica Miklas are co-founders of Capital W, an immersive theater company. Lauren also hosts the comedy show Lost to Moon Radio, which I discovered recently and love. And also, I love passive-aggressive history.
Thank you.
As a former historian, that really spoke to me. You've also worked on other projects like Red Flags, Five Pilgrims, web series as well, and lots of sort of award-winning shows, and a lot of your work can be found on laurenludwig.com. Monica Miklas was the producer on Lost Moon Radio, as well as you served as executive director. You co-produced the 2013 Best of Fringe Extensions, which is now known as the Encore series. You produced special events at LA Chamber Orchestra. You've been very involved in lots of music special events. And you also developed a tiny immersive concert experience called Music Box, which I just thought sounded so fascinating. And you are online at monicamiklas.com. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you all got started. But I was made aware of Capital W and your work through Hamlet Mobile, which showed at Indiecade in 2016, and that was sort of where I encountered it. I just wanted to read a couple of user reviews of Hamlet Mobile, which I found, cool. Just to give everyone a kind of sense of the impact of your show, and then we'll talk a little bit about your show. Quote, "I have found theatrical nirvana, and it is in the back of a tricked-out utility van."
Whoa, that's amazing.
So there's one. Another person said, "It left me filled with magic." Another one said, "Hamlet Mobile is definitely the most exciting, successful, immersive theater experience I've ever had." And then one person just exhorts readers to get in the van. So, awesome. So that's cool. I guess maybe I would love to know a little bit more about your background beyond the very brief bios, and sort of what brought you to working in doing the work that you do.
This is Lauren. I come from a traditional theater background first. I came up doing theater and musicals, traditional proscenium-bound theater in high school and then college at Northwestern, and then stayed in Chicago after school and started doing more site-specific and group-devised work, but again, traditional proscenium-bound, non-interactive theater. And then I took a really sharp detour into film and television for a while, coming out to Los Angeles and getting involved with that. And I was finding both mediums not quite satisfying in terms of my storytelling needs and what I wanted to explore with story and explore with audience experience. I felt like film and theater had some amazing benefits as art forms, but none of them were immersing me in the way I wanted to be fully sucked in by my art. So I saw Sleep No More in 2015, and I had a actually pretty dissatisfying experience in it. It's a beautiful work of art, and I just I couldn't interact with it right. I kept I missed everything, and I was like lost and confused. But I was so amazed by the production design, and also just like how much emotion it got out of me, even if that emotion was anger for missing everything. It was great, actually. And it was a real gift because that happened just as Monica and I, who had produced traditional theater together, were coming to a crossroads where we both were feeling like we wanted to do something new and innovative. And so that sort of birthed the idea of the Hamlet Mobile, which basically was a piece of theater that always keeps you guessing. Every one of the 8 segments of it has a different kind of interactivity, a different moment in Hamlet, a different set of characters, different things are expected of you. I wanted people to be able to keep collecting bits of the show and also to never quite know what they were going to get next when they showed up. So, yeah.
My background from childhood on was all in traditional theater as well. As an actor as a kid, and a stage manager. But what's interesting, the interesting thread of all of my theatrical work is that almost all of it involves new work, even from college, that point on. Always working with writers and in writing processes. And then in grad school, I started getting into devised work as well, which was the immediate predecessor to what we started to do with Hamlet Mobile. So I was particularly interested in devising, in sort of non-traditional ways of developing work. And at the same time, immersive was starting to be in the zeitgeist, and we were hearing about it a lot, and it fit together with those interests about work creation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, so why Hamlet and why the van?
Yeah.
Well, Lauren and I had actually talked about doing a production of Hamlet for a couple years before doing Hamlet Mobile,
Yeah.
of all sorts of different ideas, some much more proscenium based, some.
Let's tell them the crazy one that we were going to do one day, but we haven't done.
Yeah.
Our first idea was called Hamlet the Dark Ride.
The Dark Ride.
And it was based on, Disney dark rides, which you guys will know. It was basically going to be that you get on this little moving tram and are moved through the different parts of Hamlet. And sometimes you get off the tram and you go in, and sometimes it's big spaces and small spaces, but you are perpetually moved forward, much like Hamlet is in the story.
Yeah. Then there was another version we talked about doing that was more of a walking tour.
Right, I forgot
Sort
about
of
that.
like taking the dark ride out onto the street and using different spaces at a festival as different sets within the show. Then there was a talk about a durational version that
Yeah.
lasted like 2 weeks.
Right.
And where maybe one scene would happen every other day, sort of mimicking the actual period of time that elapses in a Hamlet.
Yeah, so we were in that part of the process where you're like pregnant with too many ideas and you're kind of waiting for something to click. And in the midst of that, our very good friend Sheng Yin Kaur, who is the set designer for Hamlet Mobile and is an amazing installation artist in her own right and theater artist. She's a friend of ours, and she recently bought a van, and I was sort of fascinated by American van culture. And then I saw this Sleep No More, and I was so mad I didn't have the one-on-ones.
Yep.
And so I was thinking about one-on-ones and Hamlet and van culture, and then one day I was driving around and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Hamlet in a van! And I didn't know what that meant, but I called Monica and I was like, it's Hamlet in a van.
And I said, okay.
Yeah, and that was kind of
Sure.
it. Yeah, and I think when we first had the Hamlet in a van, we were like, maybe it'll be the whole play in a van, just for one or two people, and it takes an hour and a half to do or something.
Right.
And then as we did the devising process with the actors, I just started to see it in little 15-minute chunks. And then I started to get excited about collecting chunks and the idea of rewarding audience members if they did collect all 8 chunks. We give you these little punch cards when you come to see the show, and that you punch the shows that you've seen. And if you collect all 8, you get a prize, which has traditionally been a bumper sticker that says "My other car is Macbeth," which is very stupid.
or nunnery or bust.
Nunnery bus. Or another one was, "This van makes dramatic turns." So stupid. So just punch. It's a very pun. It's kind of an intentionally pun-driven, kind of weird, cheesy world in a way too. So yeah. Anyway, so that started to happen, and the other really cool gift that came out of the devising process was the meta story about the Moving Shadow, which is the fictional theater company that's put on Hamlet Mobile as a way of mourning the death of their artistic director, this man named Marlon Pine. And that was also our way into Hamlet, because there's so many different ways you can direct Hamlet and do Hamlet. And I got really interested in it being about a family processing grief, and how families process grief, and how a theater family processes grief.
Yeah, and the destruction of a nuclear family and what happens in the
I love that.
aftermath.
You said that one day in a rehearsal. You were like, this is about a nuclear family falling apart. And I was like, what a cool way to think about Hamlet. It's so personal, and it grounds it. You necessarily end up releasing maybe some of the larger political stuff around Norway, but that's okay. We weren't doing all of Hamlet. We were doing our little mini Hamlet in a small space, so it made sense that it was a small, intimate take on the material.
Yeah.
And that it's more focused on the family and those
Yeah.
personal relationships rather than the kind of geopolitical.
Exactly.
backdrop.
Yeah, which of course also is fitting to the Hamlet Mobile,
Yes.
where you cannot have these huge set pieces. Everything is very small. It's very
Yeah.
intimate. It's very personal. So the elements of the story that we focused on suited the way we told the story
Yeah.
physically.
Yeah, exactly. And we also liked, of course, the mirror of like there's a touring acting company in the show, and we're sort of saying it's about a touring acting company. It kind of, you could imagine it was the players from the original play who had like continued to perform Hamlet in some weird way. I don't know. There's a lot of ways you can read it, so we got excited about all that.
And it's literally touring, because during the Hollywood Fringe Festival, you
Yes.
would drive the van around, right, and sort of notify people via Twitter, and
That's right.
it became this kind of almost like, where's the rave going to be?
Yeah.
It was really the closest model was a food truck
Right.
that we would tweet out our location at the beginning of the day. People would have to come find the van. to meet us.
Yeah, you get that sort of scarcity, that where's the cool thing happening kind of buzz. That's what you're looking for. We tried doing the Hamlet-mobile in a normal ticketed professional context in Los Angeles, and it was the least successful of the 4 times we've done it. The 3 times we've done it at festivals, Indiecade being one of them, that was the best version. Because you really want word of mouth and people talking about it. That's the best way to
Right,
do
and
it.
that concentration that the festival kind of
Totally.
affords you.
You know, and ethically, our dream is always to do it for free. Like, I kind of want to live in a world where, like, you can just, like, go into a van randomly and have, like, 15 minutes of free theater and then leave being like, whoa, what fun. Like, that's what I want. So our goal
Which
is
we
always to-
experienced, and it was pretty euphoric.
It's great. It's the best. And then, it's a little less fun when you have to ticket it, but there are economic realities sometimes to doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I like that metaphor of taco truck a lot, because I think the other thing that taco trucks do is they serve communities that otherwise don't necessarily have access to a restaurant nearby or an affordable restaurant nearby.
Yes.
And so they can sort of target, right, and deliver where it's needed. And I just love this idea of, like, we need the Hamlet-mobile in here, stat. Like, theater. People are hungry for theater.
Yeah, we just actually toured the work just last weekend to Denver. It was the first time we'd taken it outside of California, really out of LA County.
Yeah.
And that was such a great proof of concept for touring like that, and really gives us so many possibilities, going to different places, going to rural places, going to smaller communities, because we don't actually drive the van. We ship the set and then we rent a van there.
We rent a van locally. It's more cost effective
It's
than
way
driving
more
a van.
cost effective than driving.
Oh, wow.
I know, unexpected.
Yeah.
It takes about 8 hours to install locally, all said. With the set deck takes forever. It's a very nuanced, tiny space. It's like a cabinet of curiosities model. So it's like a lot of stuff gets shoved into this very tiny little.
Yeah.
Lots of layers of patina over the whole set.
Yeah. So.
And that actually brings me to, so I'm so curious about your design and writing process as you develop the show. And I think you've mentioned before when you've talked about it, sort of testing it out, the way that we would build a prototype of a game and play test it. And,
we do that,
you do the same thing. But I'm also imagining, like, in a way, it's so much more complex because you have live actors and you've got a live audience and you've got the set, and anyway, so tell me more about that.
So
like, what
funny.
is that process like?
Yeah, it's funny that you think that ours is more complex, because playtesting games and accounting for all the ways human behavior can work, but having a machine account for it feels so much more complex to me.
Yes.
Because of course live actors can be trained to improvise. And so that's definitely a part of what we do with actors now. I mean, Hamlet-mobile was our first immersive show, so it was a lot of trial and error. We did what you might call a traditional theater devising process. I cast like 4 actors who I, through the casting process, discerned they could do Shakespearean language, modern naturalism, they could all improvise, and they were brave and emotionally accessible. So very, very versatile actors. And then over like several weeks, we would have rehearsals where we're doing ensemble building, different like viewpoints and Sanford Meisner-based exercises, like different traditional theater exercises, in the midst of doing pretty intensive table work and brainstorming around just going through all of Hamlet. And I'm just like, and that's also how I have ideas. So as they're saying that, we're also having epiphanies about like, well, what if you did this way? Like, what if you did the first court scene in Hamlet? Like, what would that be? That's Act 2, Scene 1? Yeah, Act 1, 1, 2, sorry.
1, 2.
What if you do the first court scene in Hamlet, but you do it like a family fight, like you're on a road trip and you're fighting with your mom and dad, and like, it's like, they're so mad at each other, and like, you have that idea just kind of sitting around a table together. So you're gathering ideas. Then I took like a full month to go write first drafts of everything. And by the time I went to go write, I knew it was going to be small segments. I was pretty sure. And as I went to write, I was like, yeah, this is coming out in small segments. And they were all sort of different kinds of interactivity right from that first draft. One of them was guerrilla theater, that we would go accost audience members on the street, just whoever was around. Other ones you had to come in the van. Some was for one person and some was for 12 people. Like, it was a huge range. And then we started what you'd call the play testing. I came back and I staged them with them, and then after just 1 or 2 stagings, like, I'm always the first audience member. I'm in the position that the audience will be, and then it's always Monica next, and then it's our designers, and then eventually it's like friends, you know, not quite strangers, but friends. And then what we didn't do on Hamletmobile, but what I've done in every other show, is then eventually bring in strangers. They do the show for free because they know, because they want to do it for free, but they know that we're going to be observing and it might be a little rough. And that's where you start to learn, oh, people all have this crazy impulse I never would have thought of.
Okay. Oh, if we don't tell them to walk through this door, they're going to go over here. They're
Yeah,
just going
that
to
kind of
stay seated. All that. You have to have actual bodies
Yes.
in the show to see what they're going to do. But you have to make sure that you're at a point where you're ready for them, that you've done your due diligence so that you've thought through all the things you can.
Yes.
And then you bring people in to see what the things you didn't think of were.
Yeah.
Which hopefully shouldn't be it's never been
It's never crazy,
been
knock on wood.
disastrous,
No, what ends up happening is, like, most people want to be told what to do and don't want to break the show.
Right.
That's like the default is, I'm going to break the show, help. And then you kind of have to, if you want higher interactivity, you actually have to train them into that sooner.
Yeah.
That's harder, I find, than less interactivity.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. I was going to ask about sort of the onboarding experience, because I know when you run it, you'll have sometimes like an actor outside, or like people fold origami, or there's a little bit of like play around the space before people enter the van.
Well, something we always talk about is, where does the experience of the show begin?
Yeah.
Is the onboarding or the box office in world or out of world? And what do we gain from either model? So in Hamletmobile, the box office was all in world.
I would say 80% in world.
Yeah. We would break character if we really needed to really explain something to someone. But there was a lot of mystery because there wasn't too much that you had to know in advance in order to stay safe and have a good time. Whereas, for instance, the show we did this summer and this fall, Rochester 1996, it was a show where people start off in one location, they then get in a van with us, we drive them through the city and they go to another location. So there's a lot more moving parts, and the box office for that was out of world. And because we felt like we had to deliver warnings very clearly, we had to deal with waivers very clearly.
And we were also playing around with flexing the audience's imagination more than other immersive is, frankly. Like, we've noticed a trend in immersive theater that's moving more and more towards dissolving the lines between reality to the, like, and the show, moving into the ARG space. And there's sort of a hierarchy that's developed around that I'm not very comfortable with, because I think it acts like audience members can't imagine or can't, like, discern the beginning and end of the piece, or that by discerning the beginning and end of the piece is lessened, which I just patently don't agree with. Because then it's basically acting like every novel or movie I've loved is lesser than every immersive I've loved.
Because I know when I picked up the book.
Yeah,
it gets back to this idea of frames, and I think people are so afraid of being perceived as a framed experience.
Yes.
That they build these tethers out into their quote unquote real world.
Right.
And that doesn't, you don't necessarily have to have that in order for something to be immersive, to feel immersive once you're in the experience.
Well, and our assertion is, even for some experiences, it's irresponsible not to have a frame on the piece. So Rochester 1996 deals with queerness, domestic violence, Christianity, poverty, all of these really intense and important themes and storylines. And so it was actually really important to me that people be able to clock in at the beginning and then clock out at the end. Right. And that actually there be an onboarding and an offboarding emotionally. So I think if you're going to take people to pretty intense spots, you really need to create safety, and I think actually the beginning and end are where you do that safety.
Totally. It's where do you enter and then leave the magic circle.
Yeah, exactly. Now Red Flags, which was our third show, that was the show where we were dealing with dissolving the lines between reality and fiction. So that's the one that's a one-on-one, hour and 15-minute experience where you go on a bad first date with the character. Oh, yeah. Yes, it's just sort of crazy. And the thing with that is, once you bought your ticket, you get an email confirmation from the character that your app date has been set up. And then you email back and forth with her a little bit, and you fill out a dating profile. And then on the day of your date, quote unquote, you get some texts from the character. So like once you bought your ticket, it's only you and the character, and that was something we were playing with pretty intentionally. And I think it actually makes sense that after we did that, we did go over to the other end of the spectrum with Rochester 1986, because we kind of tried both extremes.
Totally. And I will say, from a producing perspective, in order to set that world up for Red Flags, all of the marketing of the show is very clear that this is a show about a date. It's not a real date.
Yes.
All of our ticketing is extremely clear. You're buying a ticket to a show that's about a date. This is an actor. So multiple times people have to kind of sign off on, this is all pretend, this is all pretend, this is all pretend, so that we then feel responsible turning it over to, okay, you're now in this kind of light ARG going into the fictive world.
Yeah, and that show does have a very clear endpoint that the audience isn't aware of as it happens, but in retrospect realizes this is the endpoint. The character sends you one last text after the date, and that's the last you'll ever hear from him, no matter how many times you text again. So we kind of draw our own line in the sand, and the audience kind of learns what it is if they push it. But you'd be surprised, it's like she's done over 120, 130 versions of that date.
Close to 150.
Okay, so she's done that over about 150 times, and we've only had people reach out to her in the real world in a way that was a little on the borderline, maybe 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
People fundamentally know it's a show. So even when you erase that line, people create the line themselves.
And so when you're I have so many ideas. I mean, I have more questions, but I want to sort
brainstorm.
of come to this, come back to the magic circle idea, which is obviously something we talk about a lot in game design. And there's this theory of brink play, which maybe you've Cindy Poremba writes about it. She's a game scholar, and she argues that when you create a frame, it actually allows people to push themselves and be more experimental and try things because they know there's a frame, and so the frame creates, some, conceptual differentiation between themselves in the real world and themselves in this play space. So I love the idea that you're like, let's keep the frame. Sometimes the frame is appropriate.
It's great. Well, and doesn't that in some ways explain why people act so the way they do on the internet? Because they believe it's a framed space, but in actuality, it's real life.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting. That was certainly our theory with Rochester 1996. The people would go farther emotionally if we let them know where the frame was. I don't know. It's interesting. There are other people we know who swear by the ARG model, but that's just not exactly that's not like our joy space as creators. I feel like we'll still play with it sometimes, but it will probably never be our bread and butter full time.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, in my graduate work, I studied people who produce shows at fringe festivals, and one of the things I looked at was scaffolding, which is of course borrowed from education theory, but the idea that scaffolded experiences are often much more enriching than free-for-all experiences.
Oh, well, how would you define those two things? I don't know about that.
So for instance, this comes from Nina Simon, who wrote the Participatory Museum, which I recommend to everybody. And she gives an example of like an interactive exhibit at a museum. And one example is you could stand and record yourself responding to the prompt, what does justice mean to you? And like nobody did it.
Interesting.
Because it's like, what? It's so big. It's like, what? But then if you give people something more structured and more scaffolded, like highlight the words that remind you of justice, or take this Post-it note and put it on this board in the category that you agree with. People are really eager to do that kind of thing. So she talks about creating participatory experiences that have these kind of boundaries or like training wheels on them.
That's interesting.
So that it's not just like, here's a blank piece of paper, but like, here's a worksheet.
Yeah. Well, we borrow from the gaming world pretty overtly in terms of how our first 10 minutes of each experience work. We always think about how are we going to onboard them in a way where they have to complete a little mini version of the big skill that they're going to do throughout the game, which you guys are so familiar with. So like,
Which I recently learned is from Half-Life. That's the first game that had the like in-game tutorial. That's what.
cool.
Yeah. Sorry. I learned that at
I've never
Indicate
heard you
this
say
year.
a gaming term. It was really neat. Or just a game, a name of a game ever. I come from a video gaming family, but you do not.
I do not.
Tetris. Cool. Tetris is great. We think about that overtly. Is like definitely, particularly in like red flags, where the audience is accounting for basically like 40% of the content. We were like, okay, right in the first page of the script, this actress is going to ask you a question you have to have a verbal answer to, or the play won't continue. She touches you. And she like says something really emotionally inappropriate and boundaryless, because that's kind of her character. And like, so like you're getting a whole little teaser of the whole rest of the thing. And if you're not okay in that first minute or two, like it's not gonna be great.
Has anyone ever bailed?
No, we've had
A couple of people should have.
and they've gotten close. We've had some people
Yeah.
get close, or she really escalates the emotional intimacy in the last bit of the piece. This is a spoiler, but she, at the very end, in the last 20% is basically like, this date's going so terribly, I hate dates, they're so fake, can we just pretend to be a couple? Can we like just pretend we're a year into dating? And 90% of the people say yes. And what happens if you say yes is that she moves and sits right next to you, and she takes your hand and she interlaces holding hands with you and like strokes your hand. Now we've been moving towards that in terms of physical cues through the whole piece. So like I said, she hugs you when she meets you. There are one time she leans and puts her hand on your knee. Like it's all actually very precise when it's happening, and it's happening at regular intervals, but not too many intervals. And if you have signaled enough times before that you don't want to be touched, she doesn't go for your hand. You know, it's like that kind of stuff. The actress is trained to read those cues and to figure out together if it's going to be okay. And if it's not, she just backs off.
Right. And there's a couple sections within the show, sort of modules, if you will, that she can skip if she senses someone is truly uncomfortable.
Right.
And it's going to start to be damaging for them. She just skips over that section of the script and keeps going.
Yeah, if you don't agree to be a couple, she skips to basically the climax of the show with a little bridge to get there. And even if you do agree to be a couple, if you're quite uncomfortable, there's some questions about sex and basically like, it's a group storytelling. I mean, you're essentially LARPing. It's LARP adjacent. She's like, by that point, she makes you kind of storytell together what your first sexual experience was like all this like intimate stuff. I know it is crazy when I say it out loud out of context, but
It makes sense in the moment.
makes sense in the show, I swear. And there are people that she skips that with because that's pretty intense. So yeah, it just depends. But that's hard to train actors to do that. I'm realizing now I get in some ways very lucky, or I intuitively had a sense with her she could do it. I've known Lauren Flans, our main actress who's done Red Flags, for many years in Lost Moon Radio, which is a comedy group we have together. But she's also a gifted dramatic actress and a gifted improviser and really good at reading people. And so other actors have to be trained to read people as well as she does. So we do exercises to do that.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me when you said you cast a show and then you sort of write it.
Every time,
workshop it.
basically.
So, yeah.
Really hard to do the reverse. I've now done the reverse a few times. We've subbed in actors. But I love writing stuff from scratch, and I love writing it for the actors in mind. I find that very inspiring. So that's definitely my preferred way for all new pieces, that's my preferred way to work, which is what we're planning to do with all of our shows. I can't imagine ever just going away and writing it and then bringing it back. It sounds terrible.
Seems very strange.
Yeah, that would be strange.
So I want to go back to a comment that you made about how most people get into the van and are like, I don't want to break the show. I don't want to. And in fact, there was a review I read of Hamlet Mobile where the reviewer said exactly that. He said that he felt like he did the one breakup sex, where Hamlet starts on the floor of the van.
He's sitting,
and he's sitting there, and he kind of just stares at the audience member. And the audience member said there was a moment when he was like, I felt like I wanted to like reach out and say, hey dude, it's okay, or like somehow say something, but he didn't because he was like, I'm gonna break the show, I don't want to get. So is that something, so you play in that space because a lot, that intimate setting is very, confrontational, right, in a way. I mean, not in a bad way, but...
Yeah, how do you mean? Like emotionally confrontational?
Yeah, because they're right there.
Yeah.
And so you kind of can't ignore it, or you can't hide.
Yes.
You can't, as an audience member, so it's almost like you're being dared to say something or do something, or at least I've felt that.
Yeah.
And I wonder sort of what have been some of the responses and reactions that you get, and what are you trying to get? Are you trying to get people to participate or say something, or?
Well, I just sat in Denver. We went with a crew of 3 to do Hammermobile there, and we kind of rotated positions. So I was the stage manager in the front seat of the van during that piece, during Breakup Sex. So witnessed from the front seat probably
8, 10, 12? Oh, 2 between the 2 shows, yeah.
To do like 15,
15, yeah.
runs of that, and 75% nobody says anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it has to do a lot with eye contact, that and like how people are reading the actor. I think in a lot of our stuff, you direct people to use eye contact to try to engage an interaction or to avoid one, or to signal like this is a place where you're listening more, because I'm in my own world. Just like it would be kind of rude to like walk up to somebody in a cafe that wasn't looking to talk to someone and talk to them, but yet some people do it because they don't read those signals the same way.
Yeah.
Because humans are diverse and varied in their communication.
Yeah, I feel like with Hammermobile, with the 8 different kinds of interactivity, if there's a kind of interaction we actually need, you will know. And if you're not sure, it's because we're open with a huge range of activities. So I feel like in terms of when we really need you to be interactive, we'll ask questions of you, and that'll signal that it's time to start talking. And we do that in just one of the Hammermobile pieces, because when we wrote it, I was much less interested in the audience verbally participating. And as I've gone on in the work, particularly going all the way to Red Flags, like it became, I wanted it to be, you are half the script as the audience. So it's very clear immediately, you have to interact. It's clear in the onboarding at home, like over email, you have to respond or the show doesn't happen. So
things are expected of you.
Yes,
If you don't
the whole
respond to
time.
this dating profile, you're hurting your own experience.
Yes, so the confusion is I want that in Hammermobile. But you're right, that's confrontational. And you said something really interesting about how you can't hide, and that is what I think of as immersive theater. Is it's theater where the audience and the actor have both agreed not to hide. Like even Sleep No More, like you're literally behind a mask, but you're actually still very physically you're not hiding. You could destroy the set. I mean, you are present in that space. And not only that, like people might come up and take the mask off of you. Like it's still, you're still really present, and it's not the same as the idea of disappearing outside of the proscenium. Like that's the only thing immersive theater isn't. So even when the audience member is cast as an invisible eye, I still feel like you're not hidden in the way you are with proscenium theater. So I think you're right.
And the other thing that comes to mind is the fact that you structured Hamletmobile in snippets, playing with sort of nonlinear storytelling or fragmented storytelling, and also with Red Flags, while it's not, explicitly structured in snippets, because it is so dependent on improvisation, and as you say, the audience is half the script. So I love this idea that the audience then becomes a co-creator of that show experience, right? In the way that we often talk in games, that the player becomes a co-creator of the game experience, working alongside the designer to explore the space and, So do you feel like that's a direction that you want to push more in? And how would you go about doing that, do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, I would love to get, I'm personally creatively interested in moving towards things where huge swaths of the show are unwritten until the group devises them, the audience and the actors together devise them in that space together. I'm particularly interested in that around rituals and small temporary societies. I do want to do a show of duration within the next year and a half that is at least 12, if not 24 hours, and does involve different rituals and ceremonies that could only come out of that group being there together. I want to make more one-of-a-kind experiences. Like, it will never be the same way twice. Even more than just because I edited it differently in my head because I saw Hamilton in a different order. I mean, that's the lowest level of audience authorship, I would say.
Or that I was in a 3D fully realized space, and during one performance I looked here,
Yes.
and another performance I looked over here. I was the lens on the experience.
And that matters, and it is
It does.
authorship, but it's I think the lower end of authorship. I want to see what we can move towards in terms of the higher ends of authorship that still feel like we curated something for you and we are guiding it, scaffolded, as you said.
Yes, and
that's the balance.
along with that, I'm very interested in experiences that provide a platform for audiences to interact with each other and not just with performers or with the physical environment, but where they are co-creating for one another. We saw that a little bit in our piece And the Drum, which was an adaptation of a book of poetry that was staged with modern movement choreography in the home of the poet. But it was also structured as a dinner party. So you arrive, you do parts of the show, then there's a central dinner. We actually served food to all these
And
people
wine, yeah.
and wine. And there was an open-ended or scaffolded scene within the dinner that then got audiences talking to each other. So their experiences were all changed by the stories they told to one another. And then at the end of the show, every time it actually became a house party. We brought out the wine again, we let people stay. And there are friendships that people developed being at that show together. Like multiple people have told us, oh, I met so-and-so and the drum, we're gonna go hang out.
Yeah.
Which was pretty
It is.
special.
Yeah, I would say like that competes, for me, that then competes with wanting to deliver a good narrative that makes logical sense and has emotional payoff and climax, which is also hard to do if the audience is hugely participating. So that was the balance with Red Flags, is like they're talking a lot, but I actually want to make sure they're getting a particular story. So those two impulses compete in me personally as a writer and as a creator, and I like that tension. So I like moving towards, I think we can move in some ways to both extremes. Like Rochester was basically like a play. It always went the same way every night, but it was an immersive experience version of a play. And Red Flags is like really, really participatory. Like, how can we keep exploring those extremes and maybe combine them into one piece?
Yeah. And so when you were talking, I saw a video of a talk you gave at the Immersive Design Summit earlier this year in January. And you showed a little diagram of the drum sort of narrative structure.
Yeah,
and there was
flow
like
chart.
the flow chart, it looked like branching narrative. Like I recognized it immediately. I was like, oh, that's branching narrative. So again, I was like, wow, that's so interesting that
there's so much overlap.
we have like sort of similar techniques. So there's like welcome where all the audience is together, and then there's individual tracks where they go off and do something else, and then they all come back together. So it's like you choose to go off in a different place, but then you have to come back, and that seemed to me like a really clever way of satisfying the need to have some sort of climax and form and something that everyone can share, right?
Yes, and the drum was set up around the idea of an emotional or energetic climax, not a narrative one. So it's like there's group, there's like big group thing, and then individual tracks, middle group thing, individual tracks, final group thing. And the three big group times together, they kind of build. And even the individual tracks, like there are just some things that you feel are supposed to come earlier, and there are things you feel are supposed to come later, particularly if you're thinking about how a dinner party arcs. So like wilder, more raw, more exposed poems and dances and emotional moments, those have to come in the second half. And things where we're like getting to know each other, just introducing themes, those have to come in the first half. So if you start to structure it, just the feeling of the thing. I mean, it's like putting together a good mixtape. It's like, this song just goes earlier. Like, it just does, And so you put those things earlier, and you put the things that just feel later, and then eventually it feels like a climax. So I'll say that show wasn't 100% successful. If you got certain tracks, you probably wouldn't feel there was a climax. Like, I don't think it was a total success, and that was partially because of time. I don't think I got to craft all the tracks as perfectly as I wanted to. So if I was to redo that kind of experience, which we will, I think, again, then I want to make sure I have the time in the development process to make sure every track does add up to something. So that's the challenge with the multi-track.
Such an interesting idea. So I want to make sure I leave room for questions from everyone else. We've already talked a little bit about this idea of what is next and where do you want to push what capital W does, and obviously scaling up from Hamlet Mobile is an interesting, right, and challenging project. So, yeah, what are some ways? I mean, we've already talked a little bit about the future for Capital W, but
Well, there's a couple different ways that we think about scale. One that immersive creators are always talking about is throughput. Like, how can you just get more people in to see your work all the time? But that's not the only way to think about growth. So we also think about how do we go to more different places? How are we extending runs longer? How can we make things sustainable for actors, both financially and emotionally, so that they can run a show for a longer period of time to create more opportunities for people to see it?
I'm always, drawn to do work that is a small enough group that you can get to know everybody else in the group through the course of the show, and that's because I'm fundamentally drawn to make sublime or transcendent experiences for people, which you can only do if there's safety. So, a dinner party is a transcendent experience if it's a good one. You kind of feel like you went on a journey that's far longer than the 2 hours you were actually there. And I want to keep doing things like that for people. I'm compelled to do that. To create sites for people to process emotion and spiritual understanding and just making sense of who they are and what they're doing here. That is the kind of work I want to do, and that can be hard or it can be joyful. I want the whole range of human feelings in that space. So that means that we always need to do work that is safe and creates that frame so that people can, like we said, go to the brink. So I want to keep looking for work that goes to the brink and basically gives audience members the experience that I think my actors have in my shows. So I think the first thing I figured out as a director was how to help actors have transformative experiences, and then the second thing has been how to have audience members have that same experience or their version of that experience. So that's why I'm interested in playing with duration, because some of it just is about time. It's just how long you're all together. But it's also about what you do with them in that time, obviously. So we want to keep playing with that. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's open it up to other folks for questions.
So fantastic, so fascinating, wonderful work. Just riffing off that last bit of the conversation. One thing I'm really inspired by is the federal project #1 stuff that was done during the Works Progress Administration. One of the things that they go to towns and they devise theater in the towns with the people of the town to help the country to tell its own story and really to mend it together in the wake of a crisis that's not totally dissimilar to the one that we're in now. So I was wondering if you've had any thoughts about taking your devising process also into sort of audience space and working with audiences and maybe diverse and different and unusual audiences, like drive out to Kentucky or something and do this. Any thoughts about that or plans?
It's something I've certainly thought about and am eager to do. Lauren has done has done some workshops, like 2-day workshops with folks doing that kind of stuff. And we're going to go to the University of Illinois in February, and we'll do some of that with students there.
But I think you're right. I think part of doing that there is about us starting to model what's our version of that.
Right.
I've been lucky enough to study with some other theater companies who've done some of that in the past, and there are definitely artists out there doing that work. But they're not doing. I only know of one artist doing that work in the immersive space explicitly. Michael Tara Garver, who's based in New York, and her work is like that. There's so much more room for it, because I think you're right. You're creating basically this sort of like wonderful creative space that the audience becomes the performers, but then they give it back to a new audience, their community. So you're still fundamentally, I guess, doing a similar process to what we do. You're just starting with a group of potentially non-actors. So I think we'd be really compelled to do that. I feel like the first phase of Capital W has been about us learning the skills of this version of the art form, even though we'd come with decades of experience before this, like doing it in this version of it. And then I'm hoping that phase 2 can be a deeper sense of mission and community engagement in the way you're talking about. I think that's right.
Try and hold the
He does too.
Oh, do you have one?
I just feel bad. I have that same moleskin notebook.
It's a great
Great color. It's a vibrant yellow.
Yes.
Really great to put ideas into.
Yeah.
So you recently took the show to Denver, I grew up in Denver, so I know that the weather this time of year is quite cold.
Oh, yes.
And so I wanted to ask how weather and other sorts of uncontrollable contexts for a show like this can affect and impact the show on a logistical level, but also on just like an emotional level for the people in it.
Wow.
Good question.
Well, it's so funny you asked that because the last 48 hours of my time in Denver, 24 of Lauren's, were in 3 to 5 inches of snow.
We didn't have a plan before we.
We didn't have a plan. for
About
snow.
2 weeks before we went to Denver, it suddenly occurred to me to Google the weather.
Yeah.
And I realized
Lauren
it was
texts me.
30 degrees cooler than we'd ever done it. And so the first thing was actor safety.
Right. And a good 15 degrees colder than when we were there last year. We were in Denver with Red Flags last fall.
Yeah, to be fair.
Exact same week.
Yeah.
And it was not that cold.
That's actually why we had waited so long, because we were like, well, we know what Denver in November is like.
Denver.
Yeah, but it turns out it's very variable. So actor safety, so major costume adjustments was the first thing.
Actor and crew, because
Yes.
traditionally in Hamlet Mobile, the box office is outside on the sidewalk, and the crew, who you're looking at, we sit outside in little mechanics uniforms to check people in. So we realized we were going to have to move all of that inside.
Yeah.
Which then also changed where we set up the van.
Yeah. So it's all those concerns. It's mostly logistical to start. I mean, the good thing about Hamletmobile is it is a working van, so we can turn it on and run the heat. Right. So some of the basic things of, oh my gosh, how will they deal when they're in the van? It's taken care of, but half the shows are outside. 2 of the 4, we only did 4 of the 8 in Denver, and 2 of them are outside. So, or at least half outside. So you really do have to think about can we stand out in the cold? And by the 4th day, we actually switched the piece we were going to do, because when we got there, it was snowing, and we were like, we cannot do the outdoor piece in the snow.
It was going to be too cold, and it involved getting in and out of the van a number of times, and with all the water. The thing I forgot about snow is that it's wet when it melts.
Yes.
I
Los
don't
Angeles,
do
we're such
lived in California since 2005. So we couldn't have people getting in and out because it was a slip hazard.
Yeah, so that's the logistics. It's mostly logistical first, and then you frantically run around and crazily hope everybody's okay, and then you kind of get the show running, and then you suddenly sit back and are like, oh, what is it like in the snow? I guess I'm learning as it happens in front of me, and it's beautiful.
It was pretty magical,
It's amazing. It makes you think about the meta narrative of the moving shadow, who are supposed to be this ragtag theater company who basically live out of the van and are acting themselves into the ground. They're basically trying to act themselves to death in a way, because they're all a little emotionally suicidal, because they can't get over that their sort of Svengali has died, and none of them are processing their stuff in a healthy way. And I thought about them working through the snow and working through the rain, and as long as the actors are actually okay, that feeling of them working through anything, doing it through anything, actually feels amazing and really leans into some of the themes and the gooey center of the show. So it was a cool gift once we figured out how to do it in a way that wasn't going to kill somebody.
Which wasn't too taxing.
I mean,
we were pretty
if
calm about the whole thing.
Yeah, if it had gone below 20 degrees, we would have just canceled. At a certain point, you're like, we'll cancel. It's just theater. Hold on. What are we doing? Wait a minute. It's just theater. We can
don't need
stop.
to hurt anybody over this.
It's all made up. Yes. So no one should die over it. But yeah. So it was cool.
So you spoke about wanting to amp up audience participation, not just with the set or with the actors, but with each other. Mm-hmm. So I guess ideally, how would you facilitate those interactions between the audience members to get them wanting to engage with each other, and then following the cues to return to the scene's actual narrative, maybe what can you imagine what your balancing tactics would be, or maybe what you'd want them to be?
Mm-hmm. I'll talk about the dinner party scene in And the Drum, because this is where we pioneered what looks improvised to the audience but is actually deeply scripted. So what we started exploring in that, and then continue with Red Flags, is using culturally understood social scripts to get the audience to engage in a way that they think is more improvisational than it is. So in the Drum, when you get to the dinner party scene, there's kind of a free-for-all where people are getting sad and then dinner's getting passed out, and some people might sit there awkwardly not wanting to talk, and some people might talk with the friend they came with, and all that's fine. And the actors are talking to you a little bit, but mostly they're just trying to get you sad. And then we all kind of get seated, and then one of the actors, and this is the beginning of the scripted section, does a toast. And then coming out of the toast, she's kind of like, I want to hear a good juicy story. Who's got like a really great, well, first she was like, this meal looks amazing. What is the best meal you've ever had at a dinner party or whatever?
And one of the actors responds first, I think?
No,
They
no.
go straight to audience.
Straight to the audience. You get 2 audience responses, and then an actor pipes in with, I've got one, and then that brings them back to the script. So coming out of the actor's story about their best meal, then there's a bunch of actor dialogue that, again, they're playing in a way that feels improvisational, and often the audience wouldn't realize we'd gone back to the script. And then coming out of that, we get to the second major audience interactive section there, which is sort of sex stories, which we do organically get to, I swear. And so then it's kind of like, I want to hear a juicy sex story. And so at that point, this answers one of your questions, which is audience members want to engage when we remember that other people are fundamentally interesting. So you kind of have to remind everybody, oh yeah, everybody's got a whole wealth of stories, and like everyone's a sexual being, and like, oh, there's all these like things I could learn about you. So the prompt has to be worth it, right? That's the first thing in terms of audience interaction. It's got to actually be cool and interesting. So then we would get into sex stories, and then that would start to naturally break off into side conversations. And then one of the actors would basically call for like, okay, I've got none of these are as good as mine, and then they would go into theirs. But of course, that's scripted again, and then out of that comes more dialogue and blah 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 blah. And then it would kind of intentionally devolve into a free for all at a certain point. And in the drum, we were flipping between naturalism and really like expressionist theatrical languages. So at a certain point, one of the actors, when things were kind of at a peak, one of the actors would like jump up on the table and like begin doing one of the poems like very declaratively in a way that switched the genre of the evening again. But again, that was a language that we'd established. But it basically is like, oh shit, we're back in the show. So in that piece, it was like that. You know, in Red Flags, you never jump back into anything. We try to make sure you never know when you're on script.
Yeah, the key is trying to find ways that, as Lauren just said, establish the language of what you're doing and what the level of interaction is, and then you show and don't tell what you're going to do next.
Yes. You know, in Red Flags, think about a date. We all know that early on in a date you talk about, so where do you live in town, or what's your job? So when she asks you, so where do you live in town, and then you answer, then she's instructed to pause, and then 9 out of 10 people say back to her, well, and what about you? And that's scripted, but you feel like you improvised it. But we knew you were going to say it. And if you don't say it, she says to you, are you going to ask me where I live? And then she'll be like, sorry, it's just, you know, kind of like a bad sign if you like won't ask me any questions about myself. So she kind of awkwardly teaches you early on that like you have to be participating in the normal date script. And then people do, and they feel like they made it up, but it's the only logical reaction to what she did for most people. Now, not everybody follows that.
Not everybody, but most people want to obey the cultural norms that we've been
Yeah,
presented.
the rules of the road.
Yeah, and even people who think that they're like iconoclasts, actually, we follow so many cultural rules all the time. Like
Yeah.
we're all wearing pants. You know, like, we all
That's
have
true, we
shoes
did all wear
on.
pants.
We're all sitting in a
No, you're
chair.
totally right.
You know, like
Yeah.
we do so many things just automatically in order to fit in with everyone around us.
And most people, and they bought the ticket. So they want to see the experience
They
we
don't wanna
crafted
break
for
it.
them. They don't want to fully break the show.
Sometimes.
The funny thing about Red Flags is she offers to end the date early like 3 times. She keeps telling you it's such a bad date. Are you sure you don't want to go? No one ever goes, even though we're basically because they don't want the show to end early. You know, they want to see what happens if they keep saying yes to her. So people kind of, understandably, I think, we're not saying this to be like, people are sheep.
No,
But,
no,
but we're just using
it's a
like,
very human thing.
yeah, just human behavior to sort of like our understanding of it. And what we've also learned from doing this work, this teaches you a lot about what humans are like. For better or worse.
Yeah, so I want to, earlier you mentioned this idea of having a lot of experience in making transformational experiences for actors, but wanting to sort of focus more on transformational experiences for audiences, which is really what game designers are trying to do. When we are designing a game, though, we're designing a system that you're in control of as a player. So you come to it with a sense of empowerment and an expectation for that empowerment to transform you. And I'm wondering, just from my own experiences with various types of immersive theater, because when I come to those, I don't feel that sense of empowerment. I usually feel a sense of, excitement and titillation of breaking rules, and there's going to be something unexpected. I know that's going to happen, but I don't know what it is, and I don't really know what the rules are.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you could speak to how do we get to that point where we can create these transformative experiences?
It's a great question. I mean, you're basically asking the fundamental question of what transforms us, which is a really cool, interesting question. And you're right, one thing that transforms us can be power. I think another one can be vulnerability and gentleness and softness. I would say the ways I'm interested in people being transformed probably err towards that and immersive, partially because that's also what that form is better suited for. You're right. I mean, I think there might be people who did red flags and were empowered by how much they could do, and that was part of their experience. But I think the people who've been most transformed by it let her lead, but then expose themselves, and then she's exposing herself back, and the shared vulnerability and intimacy is actually what they found transforming. So that's the kind of transformation I'm more naturally drawn to. I also believe deeply in the transformative power of stories when you're fully allowing them into your body. So and we can get that even from just traditional 2D framed media like movies. I mean, there have been movies that have changed my life. So one part of it is continuing to tell the good story. Another part of it is creating gentleness and safety so that people can be their true selves and to heal parts of themselves. I'm interested in sites of healing. I'm interested in what I think we all get to adulthood somewhat fractured, and then I think our job is to try to heal ourselves back whole over the course of our lives. And so I am interested in creating sites where if people would like to heal part of themselves, they can. I mean, that was part of what Rochester 1996 was about. I think I think it was for everybody, but I think the people who got the most out of it were former pastors' kids, because it was about a pastor's kid, or former Christians. And they were able to process some of their relationship to Christianity from childhood.
Can you do a debrief? Sorry.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, no, please.
That one did have a debrief. As the van takes you from the first location, which is the church. It was in a theater, and then you drive to the pastor's house, my house, and then you have to get back to where you started. And we decided to make that out of story. So the show ends at the house. We all had cookies and lemonade and string cheese.
For
on the front
15
porch.
minutes, yeah.
Yep, people use the bathroom, they take a break. The actors change their clothes. And then some of the actors come out and say hello in their street clothes. And then we all get back in the van and drive back to Hollywood. Yeah. And there's an opportunity there for people to just talk quietly with the person you're with.
Because we don't keep your cell phones back.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right.
No cell phones.
No cell phones. Yeah, we keep them to the very
You
end.
have to talk to people.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say that was the beginning of us doing debriefs. We are going to, in the next piece, do a more curated version of that.
Yeah.
This was just scratching the surface for us, and I think it was baseline in terms of what's responsible and effective. I think we want to make that a more intentional space moving forward.
Yeah. Just
Please.
when I was doing Sleep No More, I had a similar experience. I mean, I've seen it 4 times, and I've had a similar experience the first time where I felt like I did it wrong.
Oh my God, yeah.
But one of the more impactful times that I did it, I went with friends and we split up, but we met back at the sort of the bar, whatever, the speakeasy area,
Yes.
and did our own personal debrief.
I love
and
that.
And I remember thinking, this is what's important. This
Yeah.
is you
Yes.
know, what happened in there was that was the alchemy that made this happen.
Yeah, that's
Right?
beautiful. Yeah.
You know? So
Perfectly
I was
said.
curious.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's essential.
Yeah, there was a study done, I think it was by the Wallace Foundation, that involved new work at a number of regional theaters across the country. Not immersive work, but new work. And they found through that study that people really want tools for having that over drinks or car ride home conversation. They don't want to be in a talk back where they're sitting and they're tracked them, and we have to tell you what we thought right now. But they want after 20 minutes to half an hour after the show, they want like some structure to help guide a conversation.
Yeah.
So that's something
Yeah.
I think about a lot as we design these post-show experiences more fully.
Yep. Like Hamiltonmobile had it built in because if you wanted to come back and hang around the box office, you could. And the drum did because there was a party after the party if you wanted. Red Flags intentionally doesn't have it because I'm a jerk and I wanted to play with what happens if we just drop you off a cliff at the end. But that one is intentionally emotionally volatile. And then I said Rochester 1986 did it and we described it, but again, it wasn't as curated as I ultimately want that to be for that intensive a piece. So the next piece, particularly one if it was 12 hours, like you'd need an hour to 2 hour long. Like that has to be built in. You have to build in the come down or else it's irresponsible. And less exciting because you're so right. That's where so much processing happens.
Processing, yes.
That's so great.
Yeah, all the LARP people are
Yeah.
all about the debrief.
Yes, I love that. I know. There's been a lot of great lessons learned from that community in terms of physical consent and some of those things. The sort of like, yes, the whole form is group storytelling, but you have to storytell about the story you told.
Yeah.
Because that's how we process everything. So like you
Totally.
got to go back to the language center and be like, what just happened? Like it's just so important. So yeah, we're all about that.
So you mentioned, that you like there was like a few people that maybe try to like test the boundaries and like maybe try to break it a little bit, just to see how far they can go.
Yeah.
Not necessarily out of like I guess malintention, but like is it? I mean, kind of tell maybe like one of the more memorable experiences of how that like, or any interesting like takeaways from when someone who tried to do that and
Yeah,
like.
Sure.
there's a couple. There's
From-
two
yeah.
different examples. Like one that's sort of a type, and one that's a specific example that taught us a lot. So in Red Flags, I feel like there was only one person, maybe two, who really tried to like poke it and see what happened.
Yeah, we had people like, one person was like, turned to our actor and was like, I don't think you're really drinking your beer. Which she was, for the record, she was. Yeah, but it was like, you're not drinking your beer. When was your character born? What year? Like, was it quizzing them?
Wow.
Our actor's a badass and knew all the answers. But my God, what have you come here for?
And ultimately, it's like, well, joke's on you, man. Like, you're only hurting your own experience. You bought a
That's
ticket.
so odd.
I would like you to have a nice time, but if you aren't gonna play along, then that's your problem. It's not really my
I
problem.
know.
The other one that always comes to mind is the one at IndieCade, where
Is this where the person took the
where the
dagger off the wall?
person took the
I
dagger
knew
off
you were
the
going to
wall.
say that.
Yeah.
So in the Hamiltonmobile, there's a dagger on the wall. There's a lot of stuff. There's tons of stuff on the
Many
wall.
things. Skulls, bones.
Tons of things. There's a sleep no more mask as a little Easter egg. Yeah, there's tons of stuff in the Hamiltonmobile. But one of them's a dagger, and the person got in and was like, "It's a game. I need a weapon." And then grabbed the dagger. And I don't remember who was with them up there. She dealt with it.
Yeah.
She just improvised and was kind of like, "Oh no, that's ours." Like I don't remember what she said. I don't think she shamed him. It's always this interesting balance of if somebody makes you an offer and you don't want to shame them, but you want to make sure everything's safe. And that the show's not broken. So it sounded like she handled it well at the time. I can't remember what she did,
I
but
don't exactly remember the outcome, but yeah, it was basically like the actor felt comfortable improvising and could steer it back to her. And
Yeah.
she finished that.
it was
that
fine.
scene.
And then we learned to wire the dagger to the wall.
We learned
Good
and we learned, it was interesting, we learned a lot about audience expectations when we performed at IndieCade.
Yeah.
Because there was a bit of an expectation of a game.
How do I win this?
How do I win this? Yeah, what's my objective? And the objective is to experience.
To take in the theater.
To take in the theater. Learn about yourself.
Yeah, and like also in Denver, it was a film festival that brought us out as part of their interactive division. So film festivals audiences, we learned we had to drop the meta narrative entirely. People were confused if we acted like so at the original festival and at IndieCade, we acted like Moving Shadow is real and that Marlon Pine the dead.
We were part of the movie show.
Yes, Marlon Pine is real. We expanded into an ARG at the film festival. They were just like, "Oh, cool, you're the moving shadow." Like I could tell that they were not even vaguely getting it. So we had to just drop that and just be capital W, and that was fine. But it's interesting to learn about those things. I would say the one other really crazy example that's worth noting is in Red Flags, the one or two men, it's always been men, who've gotten in touch with her afterwards and tried to get a second date.
Yeah.
Very few people, like I said, but she's had to sort of clearly, it sort of depends on the person. We've always said to her, if anybody ever writes you and you don't want to deal with them, obviously don't. Just refer them to us. We will step in. Most cases, she's just kind of, it's been the men being like, oh, hey, that part where you hold hands, do you hold hands?
Happen with everybody?
Yeah. And so then she's like, yes, it's a show, that's scripted. It happens with everybody. And then they never bother her.
Glad you enjoyed the show.
Yeah, exactly. Glad you're in the show. And she's nice about it, but she's firm and clear, and that's the right thing. And the boundaries are redrawn, and we've been very lucky, again, that nothing else crazier has happened. But again, most people are good people.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is I hear through the grapevine stuff from other immersive companies that seem to deal with more drama.
I do not get how this is happening.
I don't know if we are lucky. I don't know if it's because of our excessive use of eye contact. I don't know.
Don't do anything crazy.
Don't do anything crazy.
Yeah.
We see you.
Yeah, exactly. Ours have tighter. We don't do sandbox shows. We've never done. Well, we've done things with sandbox components, but not a true sandbox show.
Yeah.
I think that's
components.
I think that's part of it, and I do think we actually are really obsessed with teaching the audience the rules, and maybe a way that's. My belief is this: a lot of immersive shows, you show up and they rattle off 10 rules to you out of world, just like can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, blah blah blah. Audiences can't remember more than 2, is my belief. I think 3 tops. I try to get it down to 1 or 0 rules.
One thing you have to be told, and everything else you infer.
Most of our shows are 0 now. Red Flags is 0, Hamiltonville 0, and Rochester 1996 were 0 rules. So this is my own weird thing. I'm not saying this is the right way to do immersive, but for me, 0 rules. Rules should all be taught in the world intuitively. Or stated in world in a way that you don't even realize you've just taken in a rule.
You're just going to get more people adhering to the rules if you do it that way.
That's what I think, because I think if you
implicit.
show up... Oh, go ahead.
So more implicit, you're saying, is it was more
Yes.
effective than explicit.
That is my feeling. Implicit rules are more effective than explicit. The rules also should thematically fit your subject matter. Too many people are like, I'll just do a sandbox show and then I'll find content to fill it. I'm like, no. Content first, format, audience interactivity second. So I think that's the other reason people don't break our rules as much, is because I think our audience interactivity fits the themes of the show.
And it is not, we do not go into a project saying, we want to do a show where people interact in this way at this point, and this way at this point, and where they can speak. No. It's, we are telling a story, or we are talking about a big idea, and we get to the interactivity.
Yeah.
Further down the line in the ensemble process.
Yeah. So in Rochester 1996, the main character is this queer 16-year-old girl in 1996 in Rochester, hence the title. And you are her confidant, essentially. And the audience rules change depending on the act of the show we're in. So they keep shifting. So we had to kind of, within the world, teach the audience 3 different rule changes. And the rule changes mirror the main character's emotional state. So when she feels invisible, you're invisible. When she's exposed, you're exposed. When things are chaotic, it does become sandbox format at the very end, when things in her life have totally broken open and there are no rules. And in fact, you kind of drive home to her house and she gets out of the van. She's found out this terrible secret about her dad. She's so upset. You get home to her house and she turns to you and she's like, has a little mini monologue, and at the end of it, she's like, you can follow me or you can stay with him. There are no rules. Everything is meaningless. Thanks, Dad. And then she storms inside. So she shouts the final set of audience rules to you in character in a way that mirrors how she's feeling. And so you're kind of like, yes, those are the rules. I've heard them, but I'm hopefully delighted that that's how I've heard them, and they feel right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's what we're playing with.
We are a little over time. Does anyone have a last sort of question? Okay. Well then, great. I think we'll say thank you so much, Lauren and Monica, for coming to spend the evening with us. And I hope I'm sure this will not be the last time we see you here at IMGD. And thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.